to the evening garden stroll of the Back Bay Fens. My name is Rachel and I'm a docent for the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. With me is Evan Bradley, our marketing and communications coordinator. He's our cameraman tonight. Socially distanced for me and wearing a mask. And I do have several masks in my bag for when we go into the Victory Gardens and whenever I see a person approach. So I'm going to tell you a bit about our wonderful organization, and I'll give you a preview of what you're going to see tonight, and then we'll be on our way. And please feel free to type your questions in. Evan will be checking for questions, and we'll stop and take your questions at least once on our tour. As you may know, the Emerald Necklace is a chain of parks designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. He's known as the father of landscape architecture. The Emerald Necklace spans, it's 1,100 acres spanning from Charles Gate Park to the north, all the way to Franklin Park to the south, Dorchester. And the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, for which I am a volunteer and Evan works, is a nonprofit organization founded about 20 years ago that works with the cities of Boston and Brookline as well as the state to care for the parks. And when this organization was founded about 20 years ago, it brought together a lot of grassroots organizations that already existed, where people who cared about their neighborhoods and cared about their parks were already doing their own advocacy, and this organization brought them all together and is a great voice for the parks. And in addition to physically improving and taking care of the parks, including signage and safe pathways and actually taking care of the trees and roses, which you'll see, this organization also does a lot of fun activities such as yoga and forest bathing and youth programs, and a lot of these programs are still up and running this summer and have gone virtual. And I personally am in my third year as a docent, and I love it because I'm surrounded by a lot of idealistic people who really care about the parks and really care about their neighborhoods. So tonight on our tour, you'll hear about the history of the Back Bay Fens. It is the garden stroll, so you'll get to see lots of roses, and you'll see Victory Gardens, and you'll also get to hear a little about our history, and we happen to move in a chronological order. So you'll hear about the founding of the Back Bay Fens when it was a very foul-smelling mudflat, to Olmsted coming in and transforming it, to the Rose Gardens of the 20s and the Victory Gardens of the 40s and beyond. And then Evan will end the tour by telling us about the future and the Muddy River Restoration Project. And on that note, when we walk from place to place, and I won't be speaking, Evan will show you some beautiful scenery. If you do happen to see a fence somewhere in the distance, please know that Evan will tell you all about that at the end, and that's part of our Muddy River Restoration work. So we will be off. join me when I say, take a deep breath. So, it's very windy, so I can't actually smell that much when I take a deep breath, but usually it's very full of nature and earthy and nature smells. You definitely feel like you're away from the city and into nature. Lots of watery and earthy perfume. However, if this were the 1870s and I invited you to take a deep breath, you would be really reluctant to do that. And moreover, if you did, you would gag and faint because of all of the sewage and sludge that had built up in this area and in the Muddy River over the years. And that was because there were many tanneries in this area, and this was a dumping ground, and sewage came into the river, the Muddy River, from the Stony Brook River, which meets up with the Muddy River here and is underground. And this was tidal at the time. It's not anymore, but imagine a tidal marsh coming in from the Charles River, where the high tide would bring in all of this sewage and sludge that I'm telling you all about and push it in. And then at low tide, the tide would go out and let all of the sewage and sludge that had built up bake and sit. Imagine like a hot day such as today. So that's why it was extremely unpleasant, and not only that, during the 1870s an actual odor map was created by the Health Commission of the City of Boston. And if you look at the map, and I believe we have a copy in our visitor center, Evan's nodding yes, the brightest red spot on the entire map is right here where the Muddy River was. So it was a really unpleasant and dangerous situation, and enter Frederick Law Olmsted in the 1870s. He was already very well known for, of course, his masterpiece Central Park and other parks. And he was in talks with the city of Boston, and he came in and surveyed our current parks as well as the challenges. And he agreed with some city of Boston officials who had envisioned a chain of parks that went from the city center through creek and marshes, like right here, all the way out through a pond and ending in a sheep's meadow. And that was what he designed. But in addition to designing a beautiful linear park, he of course also had to fix all of the challenges right here in this area. So he initiated several improvements. He had the Muddy River area completely cleaned out and dredged to get rid of the sludge. He had intercepting sewers put in for a long-term solution to the problem. Gateways were built, gatehouses were built to regulate the water and the tides and the sewage. And you will recall that we started out as a building, and that was an actual functioning gatehouse. And it's now our visitor center. And after Olmsted had the Muddy River and this area cleaned up, he had salt-resistant greens planted all around the marshy areas, and then along the banks of the Muddy River he had salt-tolerant pines planted. So he really transformed the landscape into a very natural-looking and very environmentally healthy marsh. And because it was a marsh, so imagine it's not solid ground as it is today, but it was marsh, so bridges were built so that, and paths were built so that at certain spots pedestrians and horses could walk through. And at our next stop, I'll tell you about some of the changes that happened about 30 years after that. This is a majestic red oak tree, and I wanted to stop and show you this tree because people on my tours always stop and ask about it and wondered what kind of tree it was, and it's massive, really eye-catching. So one of my fellow docents, Don, who has a landscape background, actually took a sample and determined that it is a red oak. And hopefully you can see it's a really majestic tree. People also ask, how old is the tree? We don't know how old it is, but we know it can't be more than 110 years old. We know it can't be older than going back to 1910, because before 1910 this whole area was marshy, so a huge red oak tree like this would not be able to grow. However, there was a significant change in 1910, and that is that the Charles River Dam was built several miles closer to the mouth of Boston Harbor. So this area was no longer tidal. It no longer had tides going in and going out, so the whole topography changed, and all of the plantings and trees that Olmsted had carefully selected had dried up. So a new plan was needed, which we will hear about. And while we are in this neighborhood, I'll just point out this bell. It's from a temple in Sendai, Japan. The plaque says Temple Bell from Japan, cast in 1675. So the story goes that this bell was taken from its temple in Sendai by the Japanese government during World War II to potentially be used as ammunition to be melted down, and it ended up at the end of World War II on a scrap heap, and sailors from the USS Boston said what they called rescued it. So actually they took it as a war trophy and they brought it back to the US on the USS Boston. However, I'm happy to let you know the government of Japan did officially gift this bell to the city of Boston 8 years after that happened. And Japan actually has one of Boston's sister cities, Kyoto. And now we're going to go to the Rose Garden. Not something that Olmsted would have really envisioned. Olmsted liked everything to look natural, as he called it, untouched by the hand of man, to use his words. When Olmsted designed something, there was extreme attention and planning and care to put into it, but he wanted people to think that it was completely natural, that it had always looked like that. However, as you know, there were changes to the landscape after the 1910 damming of the Charles River, and also tastes changed. So in the 1920s and 1930s, there was more of a city beautiful movement that was in vogue, where the grandeur of the city was reflected in its green spaces. So it was a quite different style. And the MFA, which you can see a glimpse of, is which Evan is zooming into, reflects that. Whereas there's now a part of the Muddy River that reflects back the MFA. So the idea is we don't forget that we're in the city or try city and nature try to reflect each other. And in the 1920s and 1930s, rose gardens were in vogue, and the rose garden at the White House was very popular. So Arthur Shirtcliffe was brought in to deal with the changes of the landscape that took place after the damming of the Charles River. So he put in ball fields, which you'll be able to see, as well as this rose garden. And we have about 200 varieties of roses. We have about 1,500 individual roses. We have fragrant roses, shrubs. We have hybrids, which are hardier, but don't smell as delicious. We have obviously climbing roses and many delicious smelling roses. So we'll take a spin around the rose garden, and then I'll tell you a bit about some of the changes that took place in the rose garden. Thanks for getting those close-ups of the roses. I hope everyone enjoyed them. And on a really beautiful day like today, the fountain looks so refreshing. And Evan and I just got cooled off by the sprinklers that were watering the roses as well. I can tell you a little bit about the fountain. This was part of Arthur Shirtcliffe's original design, and it looks very, very closely to how he originally designed it. However, in the approximately 90 years since he originally designed it, there were a lot of changes. At some point, these cherubs were stolen. We don't even really know when, because the rose garden was so neglected for a time, from the 1960s, 70s until the 80s, that there were a few photographs. And the theft of the cherubs wasn't even noticed at the time. And the fountain fell into disrepair. The water had been off for several years, and the roses also were neglected. However, the Emerald Necklace Conservancy in the early 2000s set about restoring the rose garden, and of course the fountain was a big part of that. So historians went and looked at old photographs to try to document the style of these cherubs as well as they could, and each cherub is a little bit different. And a new fountain was put in, and it is better because the original fountain spurted out water and didn't recycle the water. This fountain, I'm happy to let you know, does recycle the water. And the rose garden is almost entirely maintained by volunteers. So during every other summer except for this unusual one, on a Tuesday night, if you were to come here, you'd see a few dozen volunteers pruning the roses, mulching them, taking really good care of them, and the roses are really almost entirely volunteer attended to, with the help of one conservancy employee and a City of Boston employee. That is on hold at the moment, but as you can see, the roses are taken care of very well, and they're watered, and Evan and I just got water right now. crannies of the fens all around. And 5 years ago, it would have been completely different. This was thought to be a secret garden, and even now, if you Google hidden spots in Boston or unknown locales, this comes up as a secret garden because until a few years ago, there were very, very tall hedges surrounding this entire garden, and you couldn't see in and you couldn't see out. It was part of the original design. It enclosed the garden, made it more of an oasis. However, about 5 years ago, in the incredible blizzard winter of 2014-2015, for some reason rabbits breached the hedges and discovered that they really, really love eating the roots of our roses. And the roses were pretty decimated, and a lot of solutions were implemented to try to keep the rabbits out, and those did not work. So a more intensive solution was implemented in the last couple years. So the really tall, thick hedges that had grown for a really long time were removed. And then concrete barriers were put in all around the perimeter of the rose garden. They actually go 6 feet deep so that the rabbits, which we all love but don't want them to enter here, so that they can't reach underneath. And so far it is working. And the roses are doing well. They're still getting to be back to where they were as robust as they were about 5 years ago before the rabbits started eating them. But it does seem to be working, and the hedges are growing. New hedges were planted, as you can see. It will take quite some time for the hedges to be as tall, but in a way this is actually nice for a change, because while you're in the garden, you can still get a great perspective of the 360 degree, really 360 degree view of the park. Most people don't know about it, can see in. And although we don't have any issue with rabbits anymore, you can see that Canada geese, or Canadian geese,
Canada geese.
Canada geese, I'm just going to where I'm not being directly sprayed on at the moment. You can see that Canada geese have entered the rose garden, and many docents and staff have passionate opinions about the Canada geese and the fens, and the city of Boston actually does have a way that they keep the population down, but we will let you learn about that another time. And now we're going to make our way to the Victory Gardens.
Hi folks, Evan with the Conservancy here. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to enter them in the comments section. We'd be happy to address them as best as we can at the end of this tour. I look forward to seeing them, and thanks for joining us.
We wanted to stop and point out these beautiful reeds behind us, which just look so beautiful in the breeze. It's a very windy day, and they look so natural and like they're really a very natural part of the landscape. However, we should let you know that they are not at all. They're called Phragmites. They're invasive. They're not native to this area at all, and historically and now they've contributed a lot of problems to parts of the Emerald Necklace, especially the Muddy River. And Evan will tell you more about that, because part of the Muddy River restoration project is to permanently remove these invasive weeds. And our next stop is the Victory Garden. Actually, our next stop are the adjacent to the Victory Garden, the Dawn Redwood.
Rachel, we got a question just now.
Okay,
what's the best time of year to see the roses bloom?
Well, I'm not a rosarian, but from what people tell me, the best time of year would be in June or around now, because the roses bloom at 2 different times in the summer. So I would invite you to visit if you're able to, and or next year. And we do have information on our website about how you can most safely visit any of the parks in the Emerald Necklace Conservancy.
I'm not sure if that quite made it through with the background noise with the automobiles, but just to repeat what Rachel said, roses are usually best like early June, and around this time of year. They bloom around twice a season in the summertime here. And she encourages you to visit the Rose Garden this year or next year if you're able. And we have many ways to visit the Emerald Necklace Park safely online on our website at emeraldnecklace.org. One more question, if you have a sec.
Oh, please go right ahead.
Actually, this might be one for me to answer. Do you have fewer visitors this year? And if so, how has that affected the garden, if at all? Yeah, that will be me. So this is Evan Bradley with the Conservancy. Actually, as you might have realized, just on your own being in Boston, or in another area with many parks have actually been very, very popular in a time of, coronavirus and a public health sort of crisis. Parks are a place for people to go and be outside and socialize in a safe manner and be able to enjoy each other when all of these other places that we normally go to are closed. And so we actually predict that this year will be among the busiest, if not the busiest year for the Emerald Necklace.
Wow.
The Rose Garden, I think, has seen a lot of visitation this year as well. I don't have numbers, unfortunately, but we've seen so many people really embrace parks, both at a local level and within the entire Commonwealth. It's been pretty exciting. Like, obviously, we wish the circumstances were different, but we're encouraged that people have turned to parks in this time of, difficulty and uncertainty.
Thanks, Evan. Here we are in another completely different area of the park, and here's the Victory Garden, which you'll hear about, and hopefully you can get a sense of how big it is at 7.5 acres. While we're walking along the Victory Garden, I wanted to point out this Dawn Redwood, and this tree is special because it is thought to be an ancestor of the modern redwood, the type of massive trees that you see in California. And Evan's giving you a pretty good sense of how tall this tree is. It's a deciduous conifer, so it sheds its needles annually, and this tree is also special because dawn redwoods were thought to be completely extinct. However, in 1941 in China, on the banks of the Yangtze River, some dawn redwoods were discovered, and in the 1980s, saplings were donated to the Arnold Arboretum, and that's another of the Emerald Necklace parks. And one of those saplings was grown here. We have another far back past the Victory Garden near the bank of the Muddy River, and there are 4 more in the Arnold Arboretum. And this tree was only planted in 1987, which is incredible, but also shows how quickly it thrives.
Yep, 33 years. Right. Oh God. Yeah.
And we're going to explore the Victory Gardens a little bit, so we'll find a beautiful alley or two where we can walk and you can get a sense of how beautiful and peaceful it is, and I'll tell you a little bit about that.
Oh, there's someone who can see their plot in the background. That's awesome.
Oh, that's welcome. I hope it feels like home. We're deep in the heart of the Victory Gardens, and as you may know, Victory Gardens were established in World War II. It was part of the government's effort to try to get the community participating in growing their own produce, fruits and vegetables, so that people here at home in the US had to rely less on commercially grown fruits and vegetables, and that more produce could be sent overseas as part of the massive war effort. And there were 20 million approximately Victory Gardens in the US in World War II, including in the backyard of my father, who's now 85, and I only learned that when I was doing the training to become a docent a couple years ago, and my dad tended to his family's Victory Garden. And those could be in backyards or in community plots, such as here in Boston. And as the war effort was coming to a close and people were looking ahead and knew that they really loved their gardens, but that someday they wouldn't actually be required for growing fruits and vegetables, community members who really loved their garden plots got together and formed the Victory Garden Society, because at that time people already had other ideas for how they wanted to use this land. And it's pretty massive. It's 7.5 acres. There are 500 plots. So people gathered together and founded the Fenway Community Garden Society to protect their community gardens. And this is the only community garden, Victory Garden, that was founded for the purpose of a Victory Garden in World War II that is still existing continuously and in the same location. And now, as you'll see, the gardens are more of a decorative purpose. You can see some people who grow tomatoes and a few other vegetables, but primarily it's for beautiful flowers. And we're going to walk down an alley and give you an idea of it. And if you ever watch House Hunters International, when someone's house hunting in a tropical location, they usually say, I need a lanai, meaning a beautiful outdoor room. And these plots are really like outdoor rooms, and you can see they're all really beautifully attended to. victory garden plot. On one of my tours, we ran into a couple in the evening who was going to do some after-work gardening, and they told us that they were only on the waiting list for about 6 months. They got an email about an upcoming meeting, and they showed up at the meeting, and that's how they got their plot. And unfortunately, there have been several threats to the victory gardens over the years, including a plan to construct a VA hospital right here. The Boston Latin School wanted to move here at one point, and then even our beloved Red Sox wanted to build Fenway Park parking lots right here, and that one came very close. But as of 1983, the victory gardens have more of a protected status. And speaking of Fenway Park and the whole neighborhood surrounding us, Fenway, takes its name from this park, the Fens. And Olmsted is the person who had the idea to call it the Fens because it is an Old English word that means a wetland. And now we're at the bank of the Muddy River, and usually on our in-person tours we never get to go this far inside of the Fens because we have to shepherd people back to our starting point. So we have a glimpse of the Muddy River that we don't usually see, and Evan is going to now tell us about the Muddy River Restoration Project.
Sure. So thank you, Rachel. If you have been in the Back Bay Fens recently, you might have noticed that a lot of these tall Phragmites reeds that are invasive plants that you can see across the river have been mowed down in the area of the Fenway Victory Gardens. And so there's a particular reason for that. Again, these are invasive plants. As you can see, they grow into a very wet area that actually used to be river. So over time, they have shrunk the Muddy River down. And what that does is it makes the harder for the river to contain floodwaters and rainwaters when there's a lot of rain. One of the reasons that this park was designed, in addition to just being a park, is that it was made to contain floodwaters when the river flooded, so that it didn't flood people's homes. The Museum of Fine Arts and the Gardner Museum around here and the many schools in the Fenway area. This park was designed to help mitigate that issue. And so over the years, the Muddy River has been less and less able to deal with the flooding that occasionally occurs in this area. And so in 1996, there was a major flood. Boston received about a foot of rain over about a day and a half. The Green Line Tunnel to Kenmore Square flooded. Was under 12 feet of water. Kenmore Station was under many feet of water, and it cost about $70 million in damage. And actually, the Emerald Necklace Conservancy was born out of that incident. Since then, we've been working with the Army Corps of Engineers, the City of Boston, the town of Brookline, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts towards restoring the Muddy River closer to its original state, as designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, to deal with this flooding problem. And so the second phase of that project is starting actually right now. So in places in the Fens, you're going to see these reeds cut down. You're going to see fencing in places and some pathways blocked off, which is disruptive. But this project will ultimately make this, this park and this neighborhood a lot safer from flooding. It will, restore the park closer to Olmsted's original vision for this entire park system, and it will be just a much more pleasant environment without all these giant reeds around. So you can learn more about that at the Army Corps of Engineers website or at the Muddy River Maintenance and Management Oversight Committee, which is a mouthful, but muddyrivermmoc.com.
Everyone, this is where we're going to conclude our tour. Evan, do we have any more questions?
Not any questions. You have a few. If you can get your questions in the next minute or so, that'd be great. I do have one or two other things to say, if that's all right. Just very briefly, so this tour has been offered as part of the Summer on the Emerald Necklace event series. Normally we hold events in person in the Emerald Necklace, but obviously that cannot happen this year. So we're holding a series of virtual events and on-demand activities on our website at emeraldnecklace.org. Please check those events out and participate and get to those parks. They're a great place to be right now, and yeah, thank you for joining us. Any other questions before we go? Give it 10.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we do hope that you visit the parks in person. And as one of my fellow docents had said, although the Fens looks very different from how Olmsted ever could have envisioned it, it still really does keep to his original idea of having a place where people could go to get the restorative power of nature, and as a place where people from all over the city could go. So I hope you'll get to visit. Thank you.
Have a good one, everybody. Look for another one of these tours soon, hopefully.